Hi everyone, I'm Heather McIlvaine. I'm the features editor at Inside Retail, and today I'm speaking with Hamish Tame, the creative director at Le Specs. Hi
Hi
Hamish.
Heather, how are you?
Great. Good to chat with you.
I
Um,
know from here at home.
from here at home. So where is home for you?
I'm in Paddington, kind of in a bit of a converted loft space upstairs next to the washing. So it's my new at-home workspace.
Yeah. Whatever's off camera doesn't count.
Exactly.
Doesn't exist.
It's what you can't see that
Yeah.
matters.
Well, thanks for joining me today. I'm eager to talk to you about the new collection that Le Specs has launched called Les Sustain, which is
Hmm.
very sustainable and has a lot of environmentally friendly features. So, can you just kind of briefly walk us through the collection?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. We so basically this month we have launched essentially we're not really calling it a capsule because it's an ongoing sort of like pillar of the brand and that we're doing, but a new collection under the Le Specs umbrella called Le Sustain. And the idea was to sort of launch it separately so that we could almost treat it like it was a startup brand for us, in the sense that we didn't have to abide by all of the different rules that sort of over years and years that you kind of end up ingrained in as your brand sort of grows bigger. And so basically it's a collection of sunglasses that's kind of a way for us to innovate with new materials, and also essentially make sure that every single component of what we do with that collection is considered and sort of has a lesser environmental impact or a more sustainable feature. So this launch collection that we've launched with, the sunglasses are made out of a material that's 23% meadow grass and 77% recycled plastic. It's then um, sort of, it comes in a drawstring pouch, which is made from rPET, like a recycled water bottle material, with sustainably sourced cotton, and then it's packaged inside of a recycled card box with soy-based ink printing. So there's no waste sort of components to it. There's no poly bags. It's plastic free in terms of its componentry. That sort of, it's just an exciting way, I suppose, for us to be able to really like throw out all of the rules or the conventions that we've kind of over the years, and I'm sure that a lot of people are in the same boat, and just kind of start fresh. And it's, for us, it's kind of, it's more about being a catalyst for change, sort of a wider change, but also for us to be able to like innovate with new materials. Like, we don't know necessarily how this will be perceived, firstly, sort of what the reaction will be to it, and to kind of explain and to have that conversation or that dialogue with our retailers, but also with our consumers directly, to kind of go, this is actually what it takes to make something sustainable. It's not actually so straightforward.
Yeah, I was really intrigued to see the materials in the new frames that come from grass. Can you just talk a little bit about the alternative materials that are out there?
It's so, I mean, it's quite interesting because it is a collection of sort of 8 SKUs that sit in this collection, and it kind of can look quite straightforward to go like, here we are, we've sort of launched a collection out of the grass and recycled plastic. But it's, I think what people, particularly when it comes to the consumer side of things, what they don't understand is all of the materials that we've tried and tested and put R&D into
Mm,
over sort of, it in a project for probably 4 or 5 years, and then sort of 2 years ago was when we came across this material. And then it's sort of, before that we'd tried like frames made out of rPET material, but as soon as it gets to 50 degrees they can melt out of shape, and so you can't leave them in. Like, there's basically, every time we started to get down a road on a new material, and they'd be like, okay, well, this is the limitation, or actually it can't do such and such, or like there was always something to it that kind of made it tricky. So
yeah,
there was just a lot of working with our manufacturing partners to kind of, I think, persistence or relentlessness that you kind of have to, like, there was a million different roadblocks in terms of what happened, and it's about kind of not letting that deter you or kind of put you off. So
mm,
when we came across this material, and it's sort of, I'd seen it being used in sort of some different homewares and furniture and things like that. It was from this German sort of plastic biorefinery company that, like, it just seems like a really cool story, but it also like quite an interesting material to use. And then you kind of get into the phase and you're like, oh my God, I think this is going to work. I think that if we just kind of reinforce the inside of the temples with wire, and if we can, like, we can sort of turn the limitations of seeing a matte product and like that texture of the grass into it, if you can kind of turn it into almost like a design feature, then the more that you kind of got into it, we were like, okay, this is going to work. So there's just a lot of realistically trial and error, and I think persistence, and also to kind of have, like, I mean, we're in a fortunate position that our brand is sort of successful and healthy in the international market, and we are a family owned business still, and kind of having the buy-in from all the levels of, whether it's our CEO to whether it's sort of our sales teams or whoever, like that everyone was on board to kind of go, yeah, we're in for this, and we're all going to make it work together. And I think that there's probably sort of different elements from the R&D part, but also having, like, everyone has to kind of have buy-in or be on into it. And the same with our retailers as well. Like, it's kind of, you have to do it together. Otherwise it's just like, it will be hard for it to sort of go anywhere.
Yeah, I love getting that glimpse into the process, because I read somewhere that retail underinvests in R&D compared to other industries. And I think the new materials like this sort of the plastic that stems from grass that you've worked with the Less Sustain collection is really exciting. And I know there are a lot of other innovations out there. So I hope we'll get to see more of them come to market.
Yeah, I mean, basically the plan for at least sort of the next, that we've sort of booked out for the next year or two, is that every 6 months, the idea is to kind of introduce a new material, whether it's recycled or recyclable, or it comes from a biomaterial instead of petroleum, and sort of essentially, we're not saying that this is the answer to all of the environmental issues out there, but it's like each time we do something new, it's like, can we start the conversation with everyone from our consumers to our retailers, to even if it's like government bodies and sort of industry bodies, to go, like, actually, what's, like, the more that we put research into, like, going, what's better? Is it better for it to be recycled or recyclable or biodegrade? Like, what are the limitations? There's so many different talking points that I think that we're just starting to properly get into now as an industry, as opposed to kind of like a few niche brands out there.
I think cost naturally is a big consideration for retailers and brands when they're thinking about investing in switching to more sustainable materials or packaging. So what can you tell us about the margin on Less Sustain products compared to the standard glasses?
Our margin for the product is essentially the same as sort of the rest of our collection, but the retail price does sit, so whereas a sort of a full plastic frame would normally sit at like $59 or $69, this sits at $89. So there is, like, we're not absorbing the margin difference. It's passed on to the consumer. And I think it's about as well how we educate the consumer to know, like, that this is actually what it's like. There's more time that goes into refining plastics to make them recycled. There's so much more time that goes into that. So I think it's one that, again, I think we're in a fortunate position that our brand is healthy and it's sort of desired worldwide. So, like, to bump up sort of 20% in an RRP isn't such a daunting sort of task for us. But we've price or value more so has always been a big part of Lespex, but we've never been the cheapest brand in the market. It's just like we've always been good value for money. So we have room, I suppose, to move when it comes to where we can play with RRPs. But yeah, I think there definitely is a cost when it comes to your margin and the amount. Like, if I think about sort of the time it's taken for us as a team to kind of, there's been so much R&D or problem solving and like rounds of samples, and like that's definitely something that will hit a business's bottom line at some point that you kind of have to take into consideration. But I think if we're not doing it, who will do it? So it to a certain extent, it's our responsibility to kind of be able to build that into your P&Ls or build that into your cost of goods margins.
Yeah, and I know that your brand has a strong sort of customer base on the younger side, so Gen Z and millennials, and for them, you know, you can look at any survey and you'll see that sustainability is a really important factor in their buying decision.
Yeah,
does that come into it too?
For sure. I think I think that it's not going to make us an immediate sale necessarily, but I think that sort of at Fuller Specs, we've always kind of positioned ourselves as a youth brand. And so if 10 years ago that meant music festivals and wearing neon and 80s kind of fashion or whatever, that was, we would kind of, we resonated with that consumer. And I think that sort of now that I feel like Gen Y sort of suddenly became termed as millennials, and now we've got kind of Gen Z who I think are so focused on, like, I mean, you can speak to your niece or nephew or whoever it is that is kind of that age, and it weighs on their conscience and on their shoulders. And I think that they're the first generation to kind of make a serious difference in their commitment to it. I think other generations have been conscious of it and have tried to sort of play their part, but maybe when it came to cost and they're like, oh, it's actually more expensive, or oh, I don't really like that it's not as shiny as like that, it's kind of been easier just to kind of continue on with purchasing as usual. Whereas I think the difference with Gen Z as a generation is that they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is, and they expect, and they're going to call brands out for not doing the right thing. And it's like, so let's be proactive in making sure that I mean, it's of course great to be targeting them in terms of a sales point of view, but just to kind of like feel good about what we're doing and that it is meaningful change.
Mm-hmm. Beyond the sustainability side of things, how else is Les Specs evolving to stay relevant to Gen Z customers today?
I mean, I'm always trying to stay relevant.
You're on TikTok, I assume.
I downloaded it and then I was like, oh my God, I don't know that this is for me.
I let my brother send me TikToks that are funny that I should know about.
I just ask people in the office, like, what's cool on TikTok?
Yeah.
I think, I mean, social media obviously is such a huge part of it, and I think that that's obviously a bit of a no-brain answer. I think what's changed though, and we're still very conscious of, like, our wholesale business is what our whole sort of company was built on, and I think that that's certainly not going anywhere. But I think what's different now is that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, your marketing budgets were spent on how can you put a window in this retailer? How do you get point of sale? Like, it's sort of, people found out about your brand through the retailers that you were in. So it was always cool to be in the best retailers in the world or the coolest retailers in the world, and people sort of discovered you through that. And I think that the retailers still play a big role in that. But I think what's different now is that social media allows, whether it's these Gen Z consumers or like a cool mom or whoever it is, like, people discover your brand through your own sort of social media and e-com channels. So it's like, how do we properly educate them? Like, rather than just like a pretty Instagram photo, how do we educate them about, and it doesn't even have to be on sustainability, but anything. It could be about world topics. It could be, I think brands, it's kind of a bit of a weird time because we've always kind of just tried to make really pretty product and pretty pictures or whatever to kind of go with it and sell it. And I think now people kind of want more than that, and they want to know what you stand for and what you're doing to make a difference. And there's so many more elements that kind of, you look at the brands that are the biggest or the ones that are succeeding in the world, and they kind of are proactive in sort of their voice. But it's like, how do you do that without necessarily alienating people or becoming too political, or like, sort of, you have to kind of also know as a brand, what are we going to stand for long term? Because it's not like I'm not going to chop and change and go, oh yeah, we agree with this person or we don't agree with them the next season or whatever. It's like, how do you bring
Yeah.
those values into what you stand for and market to?
Has that kind of question become more come to the fore, I guess, in the last 5 or so years? Because in researching sort of the trajectory of the brand in preparation for this interview, it seems like there was really a turning point when the brand took off and just went viral with the Lolita frames. Not that the brand was operating in obscurity before then, but it maybe wasn't on a platform that had so much, you didn't have so much attention on the brand. And with that attention comes the question of, well, who are you and what do you stand for? Has that been sort of like a defining moment over the last several years?
I think it definitely was. I think as we sort of being an Australian business and an Australian brand, I think probably the first 5 or 6 years were about kind of like our presence in the market and sponsoring music festivals, and kind of like we had that formula almost pretty down pat. And then we sort of started to sort of start our international business and sort of then grow it, I think it basically, because we had relaunched a brand, like because the Specs existed in the 80s and we relaunched it back in 2006, the Australian market was familiar with it already, so there was less explaining that you had to do. It was kind of like, all right, let's just slot back in with cool marketing and cool product and we'll kind of get a bit of a thing happening. Whereas I think that once we started to get into sort of the international market, sure, like we had a few people pick us up, like the Colettes or opening ceremonies, and different people that wanted us from kind of like, we were almost a bit of a novelty because people hadn't heard of us before. So, but then as that grew, we were finding that we had to explain who we were more, what we stood for, that like to not be sort of sold as a cheap brand, but about value, so that didn't kind of pigeonhole us into a specific price point. And I think the biggest learning for me through that kind of whole experience was that as we kind of started to do our own thing, and as we started to kind of go like, oh, we think this is cool, but you'd kind of present it to some people and they would sometimes laugh or snicker or go like, oh, I don't really get it, or I don't understand it. They quite often became the things that were successful for us. And so I think we learned to back ourselves and kind of go, we don't have to go and copy what other people are doing. If there's other brands or other designs or whatever it is out there, we don't need to go and replicate what they're doing because they've already got they're in their own lane. It's like, how do we, like, what's our thing and how do we do stuff that's different? And maybe people won't like it, but maybe there's a few people that do like it, and who knows if those people will be influential or whatever. And even with the Lolita, which went on to like such like, and it's still actually quite hard to almost comprehend how sort of big it was, because we're just an Australian business, like, and that it doesn't matter if you're in the markets of like Morocco or whatever. Now there's like knockoffs of it everywhere, and it became such a huge thing that it was like that took a year for people to we launched that, and we actually nearly kind of like launched the collaboration, went, oh yeah, we've got some good press from it, a couple of cool celebrities, and sort of almost put it to bed. And it was kind of just that gut instinct or that kind of thing of going, actually, we still like this as a style, and we love Adam as a someone to work with. And although this doesn't make financial sense at the moment, we think that we should do a second round of it. And it wasn't until we 12 months later after we first released it that all of a sudden we had like this like roller coaster of a like I can't say that word. Of a lift that kind of went up. So I think it's just that thing about doing something different, doing what you believe in, and backing yourself. And sometimes it feels like it's going nowhere, but you don't know what that moment will be of Gigi Hadid wearing it, and a few different, like, it all kind of, sometimes I don't know, the stars just align, right? It's kind of hard to know.
So in saying that it's hard to know, is there anything beyond the Le Sustain collection that Les Specs is working on now that you think could be the next
I mean, there's always kind of like cool new shapes and cool new trends that we're working on. I mean, at the moment, we're kind of doing a lot of stuff for next year that I kind of have had moments of like, all of the fashion seems like new reworks of, particularly in like for that cooler Gen Z market, of like that early noughties, like Y2K rimless kind of Britney and Justin double denim thing that we're trying to like renew in like a way that feels cool and different. And I'm almost like, oh my God, I think I've done this for too long, when it kind of like the circles come back around again.
Yeah.
And so there's always different new fashion stuff like that we're working on to try and just do things that are different. But honestly, I think we've really got our work carved out for us from a sustainability point of view. And I think making sure that people like that, it's not just like a moment of press or a moment of marketing and kind of that we have for a few months and then we go back to business as usual. It's kind of like, all right, this is actually only step one. There's like 1,000 steps in front of us that we've got. Like, there's so many things. And like when it comes to redesigning tags across the whole brand, and when you've got a brand that where shiny, like a cello glaze on a swing tag is what is perceived as like sort of nice and durable and sort of more elevated. It's like, how do you make recycled card feel all of those things? So it's like, how do we, there's so many things I think that probably for consumers they overlook them, but I think for people in the industry they understand kind of that it's like it's quite overwhelming when you go, and that's just the swing tag, like that would normally take 2 seconds to kind of change. Where so there's like all of that stuff. It's like, how do we make hinges more sustainable? How do we make lenses? How do we, if there is poly bags, how do we help the retailers to like recycle those for stock plastics? Like you can kind of like, you get into this world of where you're like, oh my God, it's actually too much. And I think if we kind of like spend the next few years like chipping away at that stuff, we're like, all right, we've got, how do you, like, we know now a cool way to treat plastics as a commodity and how we're recycling or upcycling or reselling or whatever. So there's, I think, that's kind of, I feel like we've definitely bitten off the first bite, but there's a lot more to kind of come to make it still feel like cool and relevant and all of the other things that you want to be as a brand.
Yeah. So how do you stay energized and excited about making Le Specs more sustainable rather than feeling overwhelmed and like, you know, no matter how much you do, there's still more ahead of you?
I mean, I have my days, but I think, you know what, I actually think that it comes down to the team that you work with. And I think it's about doing something that you hold close to your heart. And I think that it's easy to kind of go, you know what, it's actually too hard and we're just going to continue on as we always have. But I think I did, like, definitely a couple of years ago, I had a moment where I was like, we're fortunate that we're in sort of some of the best retailers in the world, that we've got a reasonable or a decent sort of we're certainly not the biggest brand, but we've got a decent following on social media, and we have eyes on the brand, right? Whether it's physically in store or whether it's through our retailers or whether it's kind of through our social media kind of presence. And I think to kind of go like, it's our role or our duty, like we have a platform and we need to use it for good. So I think that there's an energy that comes from that of going, we actually owe it to people or to the world or whatever to kind of try and use our platform for a greater good. But then I think that for me at least, the main part of my energy comes from like, we have an awesome team of people that like I work with every day. I mean, lockdown was the hardest thing because you kind of only saw them on Zoom and you didn't have like that personal, like, I'm kind of the annoying person in the office that has like a million ideas. I'm like, oh, hey, cool. What about such and such? So it's nice to kind of be back in the office at least a couple of days a week. And I think working with people that you like and doing something that sort of, whether it's a category or whether it's a project that you enjoy doing, I think that's kind of where I get my energy from. But I mean, you definitely have your days where you're like, oh my God, I think this is too much.
Yeah, I think we're all having all some of those days lately.
When all of the problems kind of like avalanche on you all at once, and you kind of like, oh, I don't I don't know if I can get through this today, but I think that's when having a good team of people that you work with, it's like, then you've got people that kind of like, you all care about each other. So you kind of like, you can just go, you know what, I'm just having a real bugger of a day. And
Yeah.
you've got cool people around you that sort of are there to support you.
Yeah. And there's always a new day around the corner. Well, thank you so much, Hamish. Thanks for chatting with us and
so nice
telling
to
us
chat
about
to you.
Le Sustain and Le Specs as well. It sounds like there's a lot of really exciting things coming up, and can't wait to see what else you have up your sleeve.
Awesome. Thank you.